Hello, YouTubers, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 3 articles in this episode for you, and all of these URLs are in the description of the video for your convenience. The first one here is off of OregonLive.com, and it says, Judge issues guilty verdicts on 9 of 11 misdemeanor charges against 4 Oregon standoff defendants. The judge on Tuesday found 4 men guilty of trespassing and other misdemeanor charges occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge last winter. U.S. District Judge Anna J. Brown issued her ruling in court against Jason Patrick, Dwayne Emmer, and Jake Ryan, the final 4 defendants in the Malheur case, to go on trial. Shortly afterward, Patrick was taken into custody by Deputy U.S. Marshals after the judge ordered that he be placed on electronic monitoring as he awaited sentencing. Patrick, described by prosecutors as an organizer of last winter's occupation, fell instead. He stood, removed his blue blazer, took off his belt, emptied his pockets, placed his pack of cigarettes on the defense table, and was handcuffed in the courtroom gallery and said, "I love you," before he was let out. Verdicts against the 4 on separate felony charges on March the 10th, finding each guilty of at least 1 felony. Cited the misdemeanor charges based on testimony presented during the trial, additional evidence presented in court while the jury was deliberating, and arguments made in court briefs from prosecutors. In a 40-page written ruling, Brown found it highly improbable that the occupiers would have allowed that the occupiers would have allowed refuge employees or unsympathetic federal official to go onto the property during the takeover. She also said no formal notice of trespass or official demand to leave was needed to find the defendants guilty of trespass. Concluded that all participants in the occupation knew the refuge was federal government property and knew they didn't have any authority over the wildlife sanctuary. This fact was not only obvious to any reasonable observer, it was fundamental to the purpose of those who took over and continued to control MNWR, Brown wrote. Knowing that their actions were not authorized was inherent in the occupiers' efforts to attempt to assert adverse possession over the MNWR and to protest what they described as federal government overreach. Leader Emmon Bundy had testified repeatedly that he intended to stake claim through the principle of adverse possession and turn it over to the people of Harney County. There is a link if you would like to go to this article and check it out. That is the judge's written ruling. Continues. Besides convicting each of the 4 trespass, the judge also found Patrick, age 44, of Bonaire, Georgia, guilty of tampering with vehicles and equipment and destruction of property. Surveillance captured Patrick driving a government Dodge Durango on the refuge property on January the 27th of 2016. He also was filmed cutting a barbed wire fence on the perimeter of the refuge on January the 11th of 2016. Emmer, age 46, of Oregon, guilty of tampering with vehicles and equipment for using a refuge excavator to dig trenches on the property on January the 27th of 2016. The judge found him not guilty of removing government and private property. FBI agents had found a maroon pouch stuffed beneath the passenger seat of his car that contained refuge gas cards, card, and cash and receipts belonging to the nonprofit Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. His defense lawyer argued that Emmer had taken the pouch for safekeeping, believing it contained cash donations for the occupiers. Prosecutors, the judge found, failed to prove that Emmer knew the pouch belonged to the refuge or the federal government. Evidence that Emmer opened the pouch, the label on the front of the pouch that read "New Money," and the lack of markings associated the United States government. The MNWR, or the Friends, The government has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Emmer have known that the pouch or any of its contents belonged to the United States and or the friends, Brown wrote. Emmer, after the hearing, said he was pleased about the not guilty verdict. The world knows I'm not a thief now, he said. 32 of Marysville, Washington, was guilty of one count of tampering with a vehicle, terrain vehicle, but not guilty on other counts of tampering with a vehicle. The criminal information sheet was a front loader. Argued that it was a backhoe and noted that the refuge manager, Chad Carges, it's Karges, Carges, the vehicle is a backhoe. The judge, as a result, found the government failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the machine that Thorne operated was a loader. Ryan, age 28, of Plains, Montana, guilty of tampering with vehicle and equipment for using excavator to dig trenches with Emmer on January the 20th of 2016. Had argued that the federal regulation involving trespass of a national wildlife refuge was vague. They also said defendants never received formal notice and the government couldn't prove that the four ever saw trespassing signs on the property. Defense lawyers pointed to testimony and photos that showed the Durango ATV excavator and front loader didn't have U.S. Fish and Wildlife decals on them, also had no license plate. Prosecutors countered that the defense team's arguments in the face of overwhelming evidence defied common sense. At the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, notices were posted at the entryway regarding permissible uses, at the front gate noting which was open, and near the offices and workplaces defendants occupied, designating those areas close to the public. That they did not see these signs is simply not credible, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Barrow wrote in a court filing. Prosecutors conceded in their legal brief that the vehicles and equipment had no government markings, but argued circumstantial evidence showed the defendants knew they belonged to the refuge. But even so, Barrow argued the government didn't need to show the defendants knew the vehicles belonged to the Fish and Wildlife Service because ownership isn't an element of the tampering charge. Defense lawyers said, though, that both sides agreed before the trial that prosecutors had the defendants knew the equipment belonged to the government as an element of the offense. Attorney Michelle Kohler, who represents Emmer, said the government can't change the burden of proof now. The defendant's entire defense rests on the lack of evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt defendant they knowingly committed the offense alleged, she wrote. The judge found that reasonable people in the defendant's circumstances would they lacked authority to enter vehicles that they found on the refuge. Prosecutors filed misdemeanor charges against the defendants in late December after last fall's across-the-board acquittals of occupation leaders Ammon Bundy, his older brother Ryan Bundy, and 5 co-defendants on felony charges. Defendants had wanted a jury to decide the misdemeanor counts, but Brown ruled they didn't have the right to a jury trial for such petty offenses. Conviction could bring up to 6 months in prison. Patrick and Emmer were present in court Tuesday. Ryan and Thorne waived their appearances, but Thorne listened to the proceedings by phone. Sentencing are tentatively set for May the 10th. Further hearings will be set on government forfeiture and restitution claims. Colmetz, Patrick's lawyer, said he expected the misdemeanor convictions. Nobody harbored any illusions about what was going to happen, Colmetz said. They would be found guilty. But he called the misdemeanor counts throwaway charges. The others didn't stick. A Lewis and Clark Law School professor said the guideline range for defendant sentencing will be calculated on the most serious conviction Federal conspiracy to impede possession of firearms in a federal facility. Practically speaking, the misdemeanors don't likely add much in terms of the sentencing guideline range, Yin said. House Services Officer Nick Nishchik Patrick be placed on home detention and electronic monitoring. That Patrick had been difficult to contact because he had no stable residence, has remained unemployed for close to a year despite a pretrial condition that he find work, and hasn't resolved a pending charge in Georgia. The jury's verdicts on his felony charges. Barrow told the court he didn't think Nishlik's request was reasonable, but Colmetz said monitoring was unnecessary. The request of GPS monitoring, Colmetz said, noting that Patrick has made all court appearances and committed no new offenses. He said Patrick was staying mostly with his mother and sister in Washington State, had found spot work, and was spending the past year preparing for his case. Indicted in 2015 on charges of making terroristic threats a felony in Houston County, Georgia, to appear in court as he intends to fight the allegation at a trial, his lawyer said. It sounds worse than it is, Coleman said. He was overheard threatening to kill anyone inside the municipal court complex south of Macon, resisting arrest and refusing to follow a police officer's commands to leave the courthouse lobby, according to the indictment filed in Houston County Superior Court. There were many times that Patrick simply refused to do what was directed, citing late arrivals to his trial. For Mr. Patrick, there's every incentive to defiant behavior, the judge said. He can't simply come and go from place to place given his current status. Brown said she was approving the electronic monitoring for Patrick, but asked that his lawyer provide service officer with more specific information about where Patrick would be staying. Moments later, Colmet stood and told the court Mr. Patrick would prefer to be taken into custody. Before court, Patrick told the Oregonian that he would cut off an electronic monitoring ankle if the judge had ordered it. His time in custody will count toward any prison term he is given once sentenced, his lawyer said. Jason strongly believes people in authority need to be questioned, Colmetz said. Some people in authority don't like to be questioned. Patrick said later she wasn't surprised by her son's decision. He always prepares me ahead of time, she said. Yes, but I'm not surprised, at least. So there's the update on that. The next one we have here is off DC Clothesline. They thought she was crazy. Doctor extracts RFID chip from sex trafficking victim. And let me blow this up a little bit bigger because they got it in little tiny type here. There we go. That's better. If someone walks into a hospital and claims they're being tracked, need to have a tracking device removed. There's a pretty good chance that mental institution instead. However, according to a doctor who wished to remain anonymous to protect his patient, that very situation occurred last October, and it didn't end how you might expect. The patient in question was a 28-year-old woman who claimed that she had a GPS planted in her body. Normally, a patient like that would be regarded as crazy, but this woman appeared totally sane, and she had an incision mark on her side, so the doctor decided to check her out anyway. The medical staff at the hospital were stunned when they finally gave her an x-ray. Embedded in the right side of her flank is a small metallic object larger than a grain of rice. But it's there. It's unequivocally there. Tracker in her. And no one was speaking for like 5 seconds. And in a busy ER, that's saying something. It wasn't a GPS device, but an RFID chip. It's used to tag cats and dogs, and someone had tagged her like an animal. pet they owned. In a way, that makes it even creepier than a GPS device. RFID chips have a very short range. To be useful for tracking someone's position, they'd have to be kept confined in an area where the right equipment is in place to send or receive signals from the chip. The doctor would later discover that this woman was a victim of sex trafficking. Been warning about the potential of tracking devices for years, but usually in reference to how the government might use this technology. It just goes to show that the way humans use technology in the real world is often stranger and creepier than fiction. The next article and final one in this episode is off of The Big Wobble. And it says, can the Pacific Ocean withstand another 50 million tons of radioactive water as the west coast of North America shows signs of barrenness? 2011, a Mag 9, one of the biggest earthquakes ever recorded, struck on the Japanese northeast coast, causing a tsunami. The deaths of 18,000 souls and crippling the now infamous Fukushima nuclear plant. The stricken plant has been leaking 300 tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean, which is nearly 1 million tons. TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, claims it will take at least another 40 years to fix the problem. Will be another 50 million tons of radioactive water leaked into the Pacific. Technology to fix Fukushima meltdown has not yet been invented. In June of 2011, a mysterious illness appeared off the west coast which began killing starfish at an alarming rate. The illness was dubbed sea star wasting syndrome. They were literally tearing their own limbs from their body. The ailment seems to hit starfish the hardest, with smaller numbers of sea urchins and sea cucumbers reportedly falling to it. North to Alaska and south to San Diego, no one knows what percentage of the west coast starfish is effective, but in some areas they've been wiped out. Clue, the all was not well in the beautiful west coast of America. Since June of 2013, the entire west coast of North America, Canada, and Mexico included, have experienced massive die-offs of all kinds of creatures. Sea lions, birds, fish, starfish, dolphins, and a whole host of other marine life are dying in incredible numbers. Don't know why. In the winter of 2015, blue-footed diving seabirds called kazans, acklets, washing up dead by the thousands on beaches from San Francisco to Alaska. It is thought more than 250,000 died from lack of food. Last year, tens of thousands of common murres were the victims. An abundant North Pacific seabird washed ashore on beaches from California to Alaska. Researchers have pinned the cause to unusually warm ocean temperatures that affected the tiny fish they eat. A year after tens of thousands of common murres died, research wildlife biologist for the U.S. Geological Survey claims the death of the common murres is an indicator of the region's health. If tens of thousands of them are dying, it's because there's no fish out there anywhere over a large area, Pyatt said. 500,000 of the common murres, who look like thin penguins, died last year. Could just be conservative guess because only a fraction of the dead birds likely reached the shore. There's no fish out there. The federal government has issued a disaster declaration for Alaska's pink salmon fishery and several other salmon and crab fisheries along the west coast. Governor Bill Walker requested the declaration after last year's pink salmon harvest in Kodiak, Prince William Sound, Chingnik, and Lower Cook Inlet became forecast, the Alaska Journal of Commerce reported. The estimated value of Kodiak's catch in 2016 was about $2 million compared to a 5-year average of $14.6 million. The declaration granted by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker on Wednesday gives Kodiak and other Alaskan fisheries the ability to seek disaster relief assistance from Congress because of the unexpected large decreases in salmon returns. The collapse of Alaska's is not the only problem hitting the northwest coast in North America in the last couple of years. The amount of marine bird life dying in the area is astonishing. Below will prove. In November of 2016, National Geographic published huge, massive puffin. Hundreds of birds are washing up dead on the island, I think it's pronounced, in Alaska, and causing alarm among scientists. They claim it may be linked to climate change. In October of 2016, mass die-off of sunflower starfish along the coast of British Columbia, Canada was reported. On the 28th of July of 2016, 300 seabirds were reported to have washed up dead since May in Washington State, America. In July of 2016, alarming numbers of birds were found dead on Victoria beaches in Canada. On the 17th of June in 2016, a mass die-off fish farms due to toxic algae in British Columbia, Canada was reported. On the 18th of March 2016, 10 dead sea lions found were on beaches of Vancouver Island in Canada. 1st of February 2016, one whale, 3 dolphins washed up dead along Oregon-Washington coast. On the 31st of January 2016, fish never seen before in Snake River, Washington. In January of 2016, scientists claimed the Gulf of Alaska seabird die-off is the biggest ever recorded after finding another 25,000 dead birds. In November of 2015, a report by the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans claimed millions of salmon had mysteriously just disappeared in troubling year. In October of 2015, scientists reported seeing large numbers of dead or sick sea otters turning up in the Kachemak Bay region. In September of 2015, scientists reported hundreds of dead walruses were found on a beach area in the northwestern part of Alaska. Also in September, Kodiak Island residents were reported a massive number of common murres washing up dead on local beaches. In late August of 2015, there were reports of dead fish on Lake Kookanon, yes, that's how it's pronounced. It's in Canada. A scene similar to one that occurred on the lake 2 years ago. It's not entirely understood what is causing the death of thousands of salmon. In the same month, a lack of oxygen in southern Hood Canal was blamed for killing fish, crab, and other marine life, according to Seth Book, a biologist with the Sokomish tribe, who has been monitoring the marine waterway. Or through the month of August, Book and other Sokomish staff have observed dead English sole of dead and dying eel pouts on the beaches. They also have found masses of dead cockles and butter clams. And on Friday, Book said he saw hundreds of crab along the beaches that were trying to get to the surface to breathe. Also, in August of 2015, hundreds of birds washed up dead, dying, apparently starving, along the Oregon and Washington coast. In the same week, more than 150,000 juvenile steelhead salmon died in a hatchery on the North Umpqua River in Oregon. August of 2015, the discovery of 4 dead humpback whales in British Columbia waters in a single week, just as Alaska was also experiencing a surge of whale deaths. Also in the same week, unusually warm water temperatures and low river levels were blamed for killing salmon in the Matanuska and Susitna valleys of Alaska. Hundreds of Arctic char recently stocked by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game have also gone belly up in Campbell Point Lake, Little Campbell Lake, inside Anchorage's Kincaid Park. Heat was blamed for massive fish die-off at Whatcom Falls Hatchery in Washington on August the 6th. in 2015. 2 days earlier, the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge was receiving multiple reports indicating a significant increase in dead and dying birds found on beaches in the Homer area over the last 2 weeks. In July of 2015, it was reported half of Columbia River, Washington State sockeye salmon dying due to the hot water. Or I'm sorry, July 24th of 2015, a large die-off of birds plus fish and sea mammals was reported at Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska, more dead whales were found in the Gulf of Alaska following the sightings of 9 fin whale carcasses in late May and early June. 24th of June, 1,000 tons of salmon died farm on Vancouver Island in Canada. June the 19th of 2015, hundreds of spring Chinook salmon in Oregon rivers. The 18th of June 2015, a report claimed 9 whales were found dead during the past few weeks in Alaska. Wow. That's how bad it is until you see it all printed in one article. Okay. And that's just what they know about. And you can imagine if that's what they know about, how much more devastation there is. I have for you in this episode. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up and share it on your social media so everybody gets to hear the news. Subscribe yet, please do. And that way you'll stay informed. I'll see you in the next episode.